Hi, social friends. Welcome to part 2 of chapter 3 on social structure and group behavior. Part 2 is going to deal with formal organizations, bureaucracies, and social interactions. Okay, so at the end of our first video, we were talking about the various types of groups that exist within social institutions, and we talked about one of those being a secondary group. Okay, well, now we have what's known as a formal organization, which is actually just going to be a secondary group that is very large and very complex. Two different types of formal organizations. A voluntary association is an informal group based on voluntary membership. And so it's still a formal organization. Everybody's sharing a common goal or purpose, and our interactions are based on those common goals, but it's very large and complex. So, being a member of the American Sociological Association would be a voluntary association, or being a member of the NRA would be a voluntary association. Bureaucracies are going to be large hierarchical organizations that are everywhere in our society. And so we're going to talk more about bureaucracies here on the next slide. Remember Max Weber, famous founder of the field of sociology? He has what's known as a model of bureaucracy. And so let's look at some characteristics of these formal organizations known as bureaucracies. Bureaucracy is a very clear-cut chain of command, right? We know who's the top dog and who falls underneath them, and who is, the lowest of the low in the chain of command. Division of labor. Everybody has their own specific amount of jobs to do, and we don't do anyone else's job. We just do our own. Well-established written rules, right? Everybody knows what the expectations are, and everybody knows what happens to you, or what the consequences are if you don't follow those rules. There's a defined set of goals. Bureaucracies tend to have missions, like this is what we set out to accomplish. Merit-based hiring and promotion just means that moving your way up the chain of command or getting a job within the bureaucracy is going to be based on your merits, right? Your qualities, your hard work. It's not based on inheritance or who you know or your social status. And job performance is judged by productivity, meaning that the amount of work you can crank out is going to put you in a favorable light in terms of the bureaucracy. All right, so bureaucracies are everywhere, and with anything in society, there are pros and cons to bureaucracy. And so let's look at some of the positives of bureaucracies. Okay, bureaucracies are fast, they're efficient, they're organized, and they provide social stability. And so, if you think about it, we crank you through high school in 4 years. We don't waste a lot of time. The time that we have together is used. It's very structured, right? Like you go to the same classes in the same order every day of the week. And this provides social stability in that if you happen to have a situation where you had to move to another high school, while you may have to, be introduced to new friends and teachers, the structure of the bureaucracy would be exactly the same as it is at our school, meaning that it would be very easy for you to, know where you fit in and know how to align or know your role. All right, some cons of the bureaucracies. Sometimes bureaucracies can lose sight of the purpose. We get so bogged down in the day-to-day, like I think about like standardized testing and grade point averages and common assessment grades, that we sometimes forget that the purpose of school as a bureaucracy is to educate and ensure that people have learned information. Sometimes that doesn't always get top billing, unfortunately. Creativity in a bureaucracy is certainly not encouraged, and that we don't want anyone thinking up any ideas that could disrupt that chain of command, that could disrupt the well-established written rules. And so creativity discouraged in a bureaucracy. That's unfortunate given school being a bureaucracy. And red tape. Sometimes the system itself impedes on the goal. And so paperwork that needs to be filled out, or hoops that you have to jump through, metaphorical hoops that is, in order to accomplish what it is you need to do. that's a great negative aspect of bureaucracies. Okay. Concerning bureaucracies, we've got a couple of different rules of bureaucracy. Okay. The first is the Peter principle, which just says that in a hierarchy, like a bureaucracy, every employee tends to rise to his or her level of incompetence, which is kind of funny when you think about it. But think about, a workplace where you're doing a fabulous job in your current position, so you get promoted, right? And if you keep doing a fabulous job because, right, it's merit based in a bureaucracy, you're going to keep moving up the chain of command. And so the only way you stop moving up the chain of command is when you're not good at your job. So sometimes in a bureaucracy, that means that we have lots of people in positions that they're not necessarily the best fit for, but they'd been promoted to this point, and so we kind of keep them there. The iron law of oligarchy just means that power is concentrated in the hands of a few, and that orders flow from the top. And so, like, if you think about, a school board, a superintendent, school administrators, on down to teachers, teachers don't really have a lot of say in the overall rules of a bureaucracy, in that, we're just middle management, so to speak. And Parkinson's law just says that oftentimes bureaucracies waste time doing work that doesn't need done, in an attempt to just look busy, or to justify all that red tape that we talked about on the previous slide. So that's kind of interesting when you think about it. Okay, so we've talked about the structure, we've talked about your status, the role that you play within these institutions, we've talked about the different groups to which you can belong, and we've talked about a very special formal organization known as a bureaucracy. Okay, let's kind of go back to on a smaller scale here to talk about like individual interactions with one another within all of these groups, within these social institutions. And let's look more carefully at how roles interact with one another. And so your definition of social interaction is just the way in which people respond to one another. And there are some pretty cool ways that we can study social interaction. Okay, dramaturgy is just comparing life to a stage. So it makes me think of that great William Shakespeare quote, right? All the world's a stage, the men and women merely players. And so if you think about that, your life is like a play, or your life is like a movie, and you move on and off stage, with your different roles, whether it be like presenting you as your role of student and then changing into your role as son or daughter, right? But that we can kind of compare our interactions to each other like some sort of stage performance. So that's kind of an interesting way to study social interaction. The other way that we can study social interaction is through ethnomethodology, which, if you think about in chapter 2, I actually had you do, right? Your folkway violation project that you did when we were studying culture was really an example of ethnomethodology, and that sometimes a way to study social interaction is to break rules in order to understand the structure of the rules. And so think about, whether it was you facing the back of an elevator or whatever goofy thing it was that you decided to do for your folkway violation project. In some way, that was you practicing ethnomethodology. Okay. And so let's talk about different forms of social interaction that can occur within these social institutions. Okay, there are a couple of different ones here. Exchange is just going to be interactions that are based on reciprocity or a give and take. Okay, and so kind of the I scratch my back and you scratch, I said that totally wrong. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. There, that makes more sense, right? I'll do something for you if you do something for me. That's an exchange. Okay. A competition is going to be when groups or individuals oppose each other to reach a goal that only one of the groups can achieve. But the key here in competition is that rules are agreed to in advance and those govern the interaction. Okay, so think of like any formal competition, like between like rival basketball teams. The rules have been established ahead of time and only one team can win. But that's still a form of social interaction. Okay, that's different than conflict. Again, in a conflict, a group is going to attempt to win or attempt to control someone else, but it's usually by force. There are no rules when it comes to conflict, right? If there are some, they're minimal and they are usually ignored. And so, like all bets are off when it comes to a conflict. Like may the best person win kind of deal. Cooperation is another example of social interaction. In a cooperation, groups join forces to reach a common goal. Okay, so rules can be built into a process with cooperation, right? And so we all work together. We may set up rules as we go along, right? But we join forces to reach a common goal. And then accommodation is going to be cooperation and conflict being balanced. And so rules would include negotiation and compromise, right? Like mediation or arbitration are good examples of accommodation. Okay, and it's usually good because sometimes difficult goals can be achieved to end a conflict. But obviously it's very hard to do in that you have to get conflicting groups together to reach compromises, which is easier said than done. All right, and so to end all of this discussion on social structure, let's talk about social networks. Okay, a social network is just the series of social relationships that link a person directly to others, and as a result, indirectly to still more people. So it's kind of funny, that the movie about Facebook was called The Social Network, is if you think about it, right? Friending somebody on Facebook links you directly to them, but as a result, you are indirectly linked to all of the people that they are friends with, which is sometimes good and bad, right? That's a good and bad element of Facebook. But this has been happening in life long before it was occurring on the internet. That you have friends, really good friends, and then acquaintances, and then people that from school, but by name, but that's about it. But that everybody's kind of interconnected in this web known as a social network. Okay, so now both videos together mean that you've got a pretty good grasp on the basics of Unit 3. Just come ready to discuss these notes and apply what it is you've learned in these notes to some different application and some different scenarios. So bring any questions that you have with you as well. And as always, thanks for listening.